Thank you. What I want to do in this final presentation is hopefully connect in a few ways to the earlier presentations, but I also want to highlight the developmental science dimension. And I think too often I don't mean developmental neuroscience, I mean developmental science broadly. And I think too often we think that whenever we're studying children or adolescents, we're being developmental. And I think particularly when we try to take these questions to the level of population health and broader outcomes, there's really some value in thinking about the developmental science perspective. And then I'm going to focus within that on some questions about motivational learning as a key window of opportunity within this. But I want to start with a very general set of ideas. And that is, as already has been highlighted very strongly so far today, that adolescence is this perfect storm of what I'm going to call interacting levels of change. Once puberty kicks in, there's a set of biological processes that result in an acceleration of change at multiple levels. Rapid physical growth, activations of new drives and motivations, sex-specific changes in facial structure, voice, body characteristics, changes in sleep and circadian regulation, metabolic changes, a wide array of cognitive and emotional changes, and profound changes in social motivations, social context, and social roles. And at every level, biological, behavioral, neurobehavioral, peer, family, school, culture, and media level, there are changes. But most importantly, there are interactions across these levels. As you change what you're motivated to want to do and feel, you choose different friends, you listen to different music, you choose different foods, and the spirals begin. And these spirals of rapid changes across levels is what creates this dynamic state of change that can certainly take negative directions and lead to many of the problems we're talking about. And of course, in addition to this, these categories of identity formation, the onset of romantic and sexual interest, there are many, many levels of change that are interacting. But the most important point, as I'm very happy to see as reflected in almost every talk, is not the negative. It's the same set of rapid changes across multiple levels creates a perfect storm of opportunities. It's a period of learning, of natural exploration, of acquiring skills, habits, intrinsic motivations I'm going to talk about in a few moments, attitudes, setting goals and priorities, and profound social changes. It's a time for positive developmental spirals that are going to influence not only all the health outcomes we've talked about, but education outcomes, social success, and economic outcomes. And we need to take very seriously a developmental science approach, not to say that everything is adolescent where it's most important to be focusing on adolescence, but rather, what are the unique things? Just like there are unique things in the perinatal period, unique things in the first 1,000 days of life, unique things at school readiness, there are unique things with the onset of puberty that are sensitive to the particular pattern of experiences. And to understand the unique ways we can nudge that in a positive direction is a crucial part of bringing a developmental science perspective, not just for individual interventions, but for population health and education. Now, I'm going to start and review a bit of the dark side of this story. I'm going to go very quickly because most of this has been said, but I think it's good to remember the dark side before we shift to the positive opportunity side. And it's the reason there's so much interest from a health perspective that it's this, what I call a health paradox of adolescence. It's the physically healthiest period of the lifespan. It's prior to any adult declines, but it's well beyond the frailties of being a young child. Almost everything you can measure gets better between early childhood and mid to late adolescence. Strength, speed, reaction time, cognitive abilities, immune function, increased resistance to, you name it, cold, heat, hunger, dehydration, injury. And yet, as we've heard, overall morbidity and mortality rates increase greater than 200% from childhood to late adolescence. And these are problems with control of behavior and emotions. This is increasing rates of accident, suicide, homicide, depression, alcohol and substance use, violence, reckless behaviors, eating disorders, sexually transmitted diseases, worsening obesity. But I also want to emphasize from a developmental science perspective, it's not just the amount of morbidity and mortality you can measure during adolescence, it's things that are going to impact the life for the rest of the lifespan. So certainly, these are just the mortality data in the US, which again, you can see from a 10-year period of 5 to 14-year-olds, total numbers of deaths in the US in 2003. I could show you more recent data. And you take another 10-year period from 15 to 24, you see this huge increase, and it's particularly injuries, homicide, and suicide. But here is the onset of smoking. Okay, still the single largest identifiable cause of morbidity and mortality across the lifespan. The point is that all the heart disease, emphysema, cardiac problem, and lung cancer that's going to show up here, this is when people become addicted to cigarettes. I could show you data from alcohol, from other drugs. And then mental health. 1 in 5 adolescents have a mental health illness that's going to persist into adulthood. And if you look at the density of when these problems emerge, anxiety disorders, mood disorders, begin to have the sharp increase about the onset of puberty, schizophrenia, substance abuse, and any mental illness, this is the onset of huge outcome problems that are emerging. So this leads to the question, why the health paradox? Why is this physically healthiest period of the lifespan the time where there's emergence of so many problems and so many things that are going to affect the rest of the lifespan? I'm going to argue today that one very important component of this has to be understood in a truly multidisciplinary way. There are a set of social affective changes at puberty that begin to nudge one set of systems related to behavior, motivation, and decision making that then interact with risk-promoting contexts that begin cascades, relatively small effects that then become amplified in a set of ways. And as in many situations with mechanistic underpinnings of these trajectories, relatively small changes can contribute to large outcome differences across the lifespan. And we could give several examples. One of my favorites, I'm not going to go into, is how the sleep system changes in this period of time. That's amplified by contemporary life and artificial light and late schedules. But I want to actually focus on something that I think has even broader impact. And that is this focus, as I'm going to be talking about in terms of motivational science. But again, the framework for this is not fundamentally developmental neuroscience, although I'm very excited by the opportunity for developmental social neuroscience to give us unique insights into what happens at the onset of puberty and early to mid-adolescence that creates opportunities for intervention. But more broadly, developmental science in an integrative way, thinking about how this window of time is crucial for the trajectory. And I'm going to emphasize that what we really need, as many other people have already highlighted, is transdisciplinary research. Because of these complex set of interacting levels of change across these multiple levels, what we need to do is slice into the complexity. And there are many ways to slice into the complexity, but the reasons to do that are twofold. Number one, to identify tractable, mechanistic, scientific investigations that can give us new insights. There's an explosion of new understanding at multiple levels of the biological sciences, in genetics, in epigenetics, and in developmental neuroscience, developmental social and affect and cognitive neuroscience. They're giving us a fundamentally new understanding about these systems. But the message isn't reductionistic about the brain. The message is there are windows of time when particular kinds of experience are going to sculpt those systems in more enduring ways. And those levels of questions are going to take teams of people to identify them in ways that really can inform these issues. And these tractable mechanistic questions are also going to inform leverage points for early intervention and prevention. And the slice I want to focus on today is this idea of motivational learning, and I'm going to focus on early adolescence. Somebody asked the question about the definition of adolescence, and I agree very much with the definition that was given. But the onset of puberty, when the beginning of these biological changes is emerging, is an early process. It's often happening by ages 8, 9, 10 years of age, girls earlier than boys, and as other people have referred to, it's been happening earlier over recent history. And so the beginning of these physical changes is happening quite early, and that onset of about 9 to 14, the beginning of these changes, is one window of time we've been particularly interested in. When we start talking about adolescent brain development, as Anna's already said, we need to move beyond the simplistic idea of an immature prefrontal cortex. In fact, the adolescent brain is very well adapted to the tasks of adolescence. They are really good at learning quickly, understanding social context, being aware of their peers, finding that salient, being able to ramp up the motivation as needed to engage their prefrontal cortex even better than adults when they're highly motivated in social situations. In fact, if you wanted to guess who would be better at learning a really tedious task like text messaging, adolescents or adults, where would you put your money? Okay? Now, if they're motivated because it's social, the point is the adolescent brain is very good at learning certain kinds of things, but we have a lot to understand and advance the field in terms of where are those advantages and where are those vulnerabilities. One of the things we're particularly interested in is puberty-specific changes in particular neural systems. And one part of the story has already been described, is it really looks that if you separate age effects from puberty effects, affective systems are most influenced by the onset of puberty itself and the specific components of puberty, and social learning, a salience of social processes. And those are very important issues. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this graph. This is from a paper we published a couple years ago that actually was a meta-analysis that showed that it's not fundamentally supporting weak prefrontal cortex, but rather this ability to recruit prefrontal cortex when motivation is high. And the fact that the onset of puberty is primarily impacting these subcortical limbic system level parts of these complex circuits that create increased attention and salience to social cues and context, and actually can drive these systems to be quite flexible and engaging prefrontal cortex. And this can lead, to positive spirals. The desire to explore and sensation seeking and wanting to gain status can lead to very positive spirals, as I will talk about in a few moments. But they also lead to these negative spirals, and that's a concern. These are these multiple negative outcomes we've already talked about, but in order to break these apart in more interesting ways, it's valuable to understand that these circuits that are going through these rapid changes that involve emotion and motivation are really involved in systems that seem to show this quadratic change with age, an increase at the onset of puberty and decrease. Whereas if you look at some of the cognitive and motor systems, they seem to have a more linear increase with age. And that's important because we think that with the onset of puberty, we've already talked about this increase in sensation seeking, an increased salience of social status, being aware of and motivated by being admired. Yes, young children like to be admired and adults like to be admired, but the intensity of the salience of social status really seems to go up at the onset of puberty. This is a natural period of motivational learning. It's a time when social experience is sculpting these neural systems in ways that individuals learn different kinds of appetitive motivations, things they want to feel. Now, motivation is a very complex thing, and one could spend a long time trying to understand different aspects of motivation. But the aspect of motivation I'm going to focus on for the rest of this brief talk is really the affective, feeling-based part of motivation. And now these are strange words, feelings and motivation. I'm talking about feeling as a neural signal that's registering useful information and creating an action tendency. There's a pretty basic motive to adjust your behavior to feel better. That's about as central as you can get for most things that we do. Feelings are neural signals that convey a lot of useful information. If you're thirsty, if you feel thirst, it's actually integrating very complex computational processes of your salt and water balance, how much water's in your system, and it gives an output. It gives an output that tells you to drink. And this thirst can be subtle or intense. But a feeling of fear also is integrating complex processes and gives an action tendency to seek safety. A feeling of hunger, you seek food. Stepping on a sharp object is a pretty fast processing to pull your foot back. Feelings of thirst, tiredness, cold, loneliness, itch, full bladder, action tendencies are also guided by feelings. But they're also feelings of desire, ambition, and motivation. The point is that these feelings are conveying useful information and they're motivational. And they create automatic tendencies to adjust behavior in specific ways. Some of this is very biological and relatively hardwired, but some aspects of these systems are learned. And some are uniquely shaped by adolescent experience. And that's what I want to talk about in the final few minutes of this talk. And I'm going to give a clinical case, for lack of a better term, that I have several of these, but I'm going to take one of the older ones and one of my favorite ones to highlight a key point. Amidst the festivities of a grand party, a young guy notices a 13-year-old girl he finds strikingly attractive. He's immediately smitten. He approaches her and begins to flirt boldly. She starts to rebuff him, but she's flattered by his attention and finds him quite attractive. Romantic feelings are kindled pretty rapidly, and by the time he departs with a kiss followed by a second kiss, these two have exchanged less than 100 words. Okay, yet both are swooning with sensations of falling desperately in love. Now at this moment, all mental processes, thinking, planning, goals, feelings, and motivations have been completely transformed by this brief encounter. Longing, obsession, and desire keep brewing, and before long, these two cannot stop thinking about each other. They would happily forego any other reinforcers or rewards, food, sleep, comfort, and all competing pleasures, simply to be in each other's presence. With that kind of motivation, you can imagine what's going to happen. They manage to get together, this time more clandestinely, and now passionate feelings accelerate at a feverish pitch. Their deepest wish is to be joined together until the end of time. Each begins to feel as if the entire universe has always meant for them to be together. And at this point, all motivational priorities have been completely realigned. They're willing to spurn friends and family, risk mortal dangers, transcend pain and difficulties just to be together, and they begin to feel that life itself wouldn't be worth living if they weren't together. Now, all this, though they just met 4 days previously and barely know each other. Now, if this scenario was seen by psychiatrists who didn't understand youthful passions, they'd actually meet criteria for at least 3 DSM-5 disorders. And without some empathy for the heat and power of young love, this would sound utterly ridiculous, and that's why most of us laugh. And yet, this is the most successful tragedy in the history of Western literature. Okay, this story was a Greek play long before it was transformed by an Italian to the feuding families being Montecchi and Capuletti, and before Shakespeare got it and made it even more dramatic. Now, this story has resonated powerfully across centuries in multiple translations in a multitude of cultures because it captures the capacity for adolescence. Juliet was 13 in Shakespeare's version. This capacity for igniting passions to suddenly transform all motives. Now, again, there's a dimensional approach. Young kids can develop crushes, of course, and adults can fall in love at any point in the lifespan and be very intense and irrational, but that unique capacity for transformative motivational change, that one person you met 4 days earlier you're willing to give up your life for, is something that happens primarily in adolescence. And this is important, and as the main point I want to end with, is this capacity for sudden transformational changes in motivation. Falling in love literally is what we just talked about, but there are lots of ways you can think of this as a metaphor. Falling in love with literature, dance, music, a particular religion or philosophy, with math, science, social justice, or an idealistic ambition to make the world a better place. Excuse me. Now, it's important to recognize that this same ability for these neural systems to be sculpted, these passions, allow these systems to be hijacked for these negative outcomes we've discussed. And that's what the best neuroscience research has actually been done, is understanding the vulnerability of these negative trajectories. But the same processes can shape healthy passions and can shape the development of heartfelt goals toward very pro-social and very positive outcomes. And this, I think, is a framework for thinking about the developmental science of motivational learning. We must understand how social and cultural contexts shape these and the unique opportunities during these key maturational windows. These take transdisciplinary team science to really dig in, understand mechanistically why certain windows of development and certain contexts are particularly powerful. And I want to end with the idea that many people have understood aspects of this long before we knew any neuroscience. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people together to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. And this idea that we capture someone's intrinsic motivations, a pull of heartfelt goals and priorities that become aligned to particular kinds of activities, is something that's been recognized. But now we have some unique opportunities to understand at a much deeper level how the onset of adolescence is a developmental window of motivational learning, that early adolescence seems to be a time that the brain expects to adjust the targets and intensity of motivational feelings. This sensation seeking and status seeking that naturally intensify, create opportunities to find a niche of ways to be admired, and the particular social and mastery experiences during this maturational window shape and strengthen the patterns and neural connections related to heartfelt goals. These are compelling developmental social neuroscience questions about the mechanisms and processes that underpin something that's been observed since the beginning version of the Romeo and Juliet play, that And these are compelling questions relevant to population health and education outcomes in the broadest sense, about the positive impact, about shaping these emerging processes in these key windows in ways that lead to healthy, positive outcomes. So I want to end by saying that I think this is a time of enormous opportunity for pioneering work by transdisciplinary teams to reach across these levels from the most basic level of the developmental science, developmental social neuroscience, and basic aspects of neuroscience, out to how the social processes shape these systems in enduring ways, particularly in terms of these feeling-based motivational systems. It's a very exciting time, and I think that Berkeley and the I4Y group and the School of Public Health, as well as the group of us that are housed over in the Center of the Developing Adolescent at IHD, are a wonderful matrix of a unique team, not just for Berkeley campus and for this region, but I think internationally, to think about how to build across these multiple levels for the broad set of outcomes that we've only begun to outline here today, and make these bridges in ways that can really inform how to have a positive impact on youth. Thank you very much.